Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all gathered here today. On behalf of the ADB, I'd like to welcome you to this session on Subsea Interconnectors for ASEAN's clean energy future. Let me start by thanking the ASEAN Center for Energy, our partners, and of course, every one of you for being part of this important discussion. This topic couldn't be more timely. And as we heard since this afternoon, we heard a lot about this initiative. Across ASEAN, we are seeing real momentum toward a cleaner, more sustainable energy systems. To truly unlock the region's renewable potential, we need to connect, to trade energy, not just within borders, but across them. That's where subsea interconnectors come in. These cables can allow clean energy to move to where it's needed most, across seas and archipelagos that have long stood as natural barriers. In other words, they can turn our seas into connectors, not dividers. But of course, technology alone isn't enough. We need the right policies, financing, and partnerships to make these projects happen. At ADB, we are helping to build these connectors through the ASEAN Power Grid Financing Initiative, which we designed together with the World Bank and the ASEAN. We are working to mobilize financial support to APG, turning ambitious interconnection plans, both overland and subsea, into bankable, investable projects. We are also establishing the Partnership for ASEAN Connectivity on Energy, PACE, to bring together multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, financial institutions, and donors to better align technical and financing support for APG projects. Ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN's story has always been one of connection, of linking economies, ideas, and people. Subsea interconnectors are simply the next chapter in that story. They can help us realize the ASEAN Community Vision 2045, a vision of shared prosperity powered by clean and secure energy. So today, let's imagine and discuss what an interconnected ASEAN could truly look like by turning the vision into reality and how we can work together toward it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, DG Hide, for your thoughtful opening remarks. Now, to further demonstrate how we can turn this vision into reality, I would like to invite Mr. Rob Rome to deliver his keynote presentation on decades of lessons learned, culminating in the Viking Link interconnector, the world record holder. Rob is the Director of Commercial, Customer and Regulation for the National Grid's Interconnectors business. He is accountable for the strategy of National Grid's interconnectors, including developing and optimizing products, ancillary services, and hedging strategies, leading all aspects of commercial and regulatory interfaces with a focus on improving policy and market design. Rob holds an electrical and electronic engineering degree from Strathclyde University and an executive MBA from Manchester Business School. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. First question for the audience. Who loves interconnectors? Oh, some people don't know. What's wrong with you? What happened? You got two hands, thank you. Yeah. Who loves the ambition of the ASEAN power grid? Still some doubting people here. I'm not so keen on this row, this one here. Oh, thank you, two hands. And did you hear the Malaysian Prime Minister just today? I wrote it down. I think everyone wrote it down. The APG is the crown in the jewel for the ASEAN region. it's something I believe also. I was kindly invited in June to the ASEF in Manila, thanks to ADB. And I was there to talk about, the UK interconnectors, UK regulatory schemes, cap and floor, all that stuff. But I got really, really motivated and excited about the ambition of the APG. And I thought to myself, they want what we have in the UK and Europe, an interconnected grid where countries can get along, share resources, help each other out. And I truly want to help, as personally and as National Grid, I do want to help you achieve your ambitions, because I think it's a wonderful ambition and will improve the lives of everyone across the member states within the ASEAN region. And I've seen it firsthand. I used to, before I joined National Grid's interconnector business, I used to run the control centre, the National Control Centre in the UK, keeping the lights on in the UK. And if you remember the COVID period we had, in the COVID summer we had too much generation for a really low demand because we were all locked down. You probably remember it well. But in the winter, we had the opposite. We had really high demand all across Europe and the UK, and the plant was failing. The gas plant, the coal plant, biomass, nuclear plant, because it couldn't take its summer outages, it started to fail. And there was one standout portfolio that kept the lights on in the UK, and that was the interconnector fleet. There was nothing else left in the tank. Our interconnector fleet, during that winter, exported almost all day for 18 months. But for our 2-hour peak demand period, 5 to 7 p.m. in the UK, those interconnectors came all the way back in, supported the UK, kept the lights on, and then when the UK didn't need it, when the market wasn't so tight, they went all the way back out again. And that's the beauty of a grid-to-grid, two-way interconnection between countries who want to support each other in times of stress. And of course, the carbon benefits you get from that, as well as security of supply, and the lower prices for consumers, because you don't have to dispatch that really expensive peaking plant. So that's why I love interconnectors. You shouldn't have given me a laser, by the way. You shouldn't have given it to me. I'm going to be lasering everything up there. But where did we start as National Grid? A long time ago. The first interconnector in 1961. A lot of people think it was IFA in 1986. That was the second one. But we learned a lot of lessons from that first one. We didn't bury the cables. We laid them on the seabed with ship's anchors pulling them left, right, and center. A lot of outages. Had some issues as well with the conversion. But of course, because of that experience, we wanted to then, as partners, UK and France, we've a very good relationship there. We decided that we should build a new one, a 2 gigawatt interconnection called IFA. And it was commissioned in 1986. It was never ever envisaged that IFA would export from UK to France. It was always built with the ambition of allowing France to export its surplus nuclear power, cheap, low-carbon nuclear power to the UK, which was mainly at that time generating on coal and then gas. And that little machine there, let's see if I can use my laser. See that there? That little machine there, that's sitting at the French end in Calais, and that's the little plough that was underneath the ocean. It's like a child's drawing, isn't it? You had 2 people in there digging a trench and laying a cable, or the ship above, obviously. And isn't it amazing what humans can do? And IFA, if we go to the next slide, you'll see it's still in operation. And actually, a few weeks ago, it's 40 years old next year. And a few weeks ago, we went to our board, and we got the board to approve a further 25 years life for IFA. And that's using the existing cables, upgrading some transformers and doing some maintenance on each side. That's IFA there. See that short one there? 2,000 megawatts, commissioned in 1986. what did we do then? We created Nemo, that one there, to the Netherlands. BritNed there, to the Netherlands, with Tenet, our partners, 2011. Next one was Nemo, 2019, with our Belgian partners. I told you this laser would cause some trouble. North Sea Link, that was November 2021, with our Norwegian partner Statnett. IFA 2 here, the second one with France, January 2021. And lastly, the world record holder, Viking Link, the longest land and subsea interconnector, commissioned in December 2023. And in the presentation, what I'm going to try to do is take you through the journey of creating Viking Link, which is based on the lessons learned from all the other interconnectors, but also test and probe what it might mean for the ASEAN region. Now, courtesy of my now good friend since June, Phil Napier-Moore, sitting in the front row there, Mott MacDonald. When I went back after the ASEF in June, and I was really inspired by the ASEAN Power Grid ambition, and I really wanted National Grid to be involved, I thought I must make a proposal, and myself and my good friends, Mark Tunney over there, had many discussions about what National Grid could do in the ASEAN region, and why hadn't it been done already? And I was really scratching my head. It's obvious to connect all the 10 becoming 11 member states in the ASEAN region. Why hasn't it been done? It mustn't be technically feasible, is what I thought to myself. So kindly, Phil produced these bathymetries, and actually, you've got the North Sea. You've got the North Sea here with all our interconnectors on it, as per the last diagram. And then Mott MacDonald took the ASEAN region, overlaid the AIMS-3 interconnectors on there. Turns out you have very similar conditions to the North Sea. So that's certainly not a blocker to the ASEAN ambition, and that's great news. Here's Viking Link then. So that's the route, as you can see over there. 762 kilometers, UK to Denmark, developed in cooperation with National Grid and the Danish transmission system owner and operator Energinet. 1.4 gigawatts. What to say about Viking? It's been very, very successful so far, even though there was some, first-of-a-kind innovations in there, and we'll come on to it. But a very successful project, and certainly one to learn from. It passes through 4 water jurisdictions. And we did it. We got the easements from the different countries whose waters we passed through. And again, that shouldn't be a blocker for ASEAN connectivity. Member states should be helping each other out, allowing those cables to pass through each other's water for the benefit of the whole region. We do it in the UK. I don't see any reason why it can't be done anywhere else. How has Viking Link performed then? So here we've got, that's 2025, the bar chart on the left, availability to date. So some issues in January, a major outage in May, but you can see 94% availability for 2025, reliability almost 100%. Really, really strong performance. And bear in mind, it's a young asset, commissioned in December 23. The next chart, Viking flows. So the dark lines are the flows from Denmark to the UK, so it's importing into the UK. And then there's the export lines there, how much it's exported to Denmark from the UK. And basically, it depends who's got the wind. So if the UK's got the wind, we export. It means we don't have to dispatch as much gas. And if we've got more wind in Denmark, it means they're basically scheduling against demand using gas and imports from Germany and other places. But if Denmark's got the wind, then they export to us. And that's the way. And it's Viking Link's a bit like a switch. And this is the beauty of a grid-to-grid interconnector that's designed to go both ways. And I know in the ASEAN region you have lots of generation to grid projects. There's nothing wrong with those. We have a lot of those in the UK as well. It's mainly offshore wind with a radial feed onshore, which is our generation to grid model. Nothing wrong with those. But certainly in our portfolio, we see a lot of benefit. And each country, each connecting country sees a lot of benefit with a grid-to-grid interconnector. Some more stats here from go live date. Imports almost 9 terawatt hours. Zero carbon, 6.5 terawatt hours of that. That's equivalent of powering 3 million houses. And in the life of the asset, we see that we're going to reduce by 7 million tons, take almost 3.5 million non-EV cars off the road, and power 2.5 million houses per year, all with one link. Revenue-wise, made 141 million, profit of 49 million. Yeah, so far so good with Viking Link. Some construction facts on Viking Link. So number one there, what did it cost us? 731 million capex. Delivered it, well under budget. Now I know that prices have doubled almost since Viking Link was commissioned, but perhaps the supply chain is experiencing some softening now because of those high prices. Not many people are buying into that. We didn't, lots of lessons learned for Viking, but we didn't just follow the same route as the other interconnectors. We did use first-of-a-kind technology. It was the first 525 kV bipole VSC. There's some more innovations there as well. 4 years of continuous cable manufacturing from NKT and Prysmian. And we also use Prysmian's new cable laying vessel. And of course, during the delivery of Viking, if you think about it being delivered all the way up to 2023, we had COVID-19, we had the Ukraine war and the crisis that I described earlier, where we were feeding Europe with lots of power and taking it back to our demand peak. Huge increases in inflation, as you can imagine. And a real crisis, up to £700 per megawatt hour base load power prices in the UK during that period. We were also taken out of Europe, if you remember. We had Brexit. The UK chose to leave Europe. I'm sorry about that. But we were also working with our partners, and we were no longer in the EU. And so, yeah, we're quite proud of Viking Link, as you can probably tell. A Guinness World Record, as I mentioned before, the longest land and subsea interconnector, HVDC. Just a point of note, because if there's any Norwegians in the room, the North Sea link has the longest offshore link, but with Viking Link we've got about 80 kilometers onshore at each end, which overall makes it the longest one. So lots of construction lessons learned from the past then. So I spoke a bit about having a great partner. Anybody married in the room? There's not so many, actually. Not so many. There's a lot of single candidates in the room, if anyone's interested. But you need a good relationship, don't you, with your partner? That's it. And you need to dedicate time to your partner. Understand them. Put yourself in their shoes. Ask them to put themselves in your shoes. It's all about compromise, isn't it, and reasonableness. If any one of you digs your heels in, things start to break down. I feel like a marriage counselor. I don't know what's happened. But it's really, really key that you keep on side with your partner and also play to your strengths. When we built Viking Link, National Grid decided to take on certain roles. Energenet, on the other side, decided to take on certain roles. You can't have two leaders, can you? If you have, co-accountability, co-managers, it rarely works. People try it. But you need one person, accountable for a particular part of the delivery. And then, of course, you need all the delivery elements seamlessly integrated. And, we did experience some issues between alignment of converter station and cables. But that was seen early because we had an active sponsor and a very active program director. Those issues were seen very early and rectified. And it says here, we had walk-ins, we had new regulatory requirements, new IT security requirements, NIS, Network and Information Systems security arrangements. That hadn't been planned in. That was an add-on to the design, but was done successfully. And the regulatory model on each side was also different. People talk about harmonizing and aligning everything before you start a project. You don't need to do that. You can start and you can make sure that everything is compatible. It doesn't need to be identical, but it has to be compatible. Now, we get many questions about cap and floor and how does it work. So if I try and explain just from first principles, because I know in the ASEAN region, a lot of focus is on PPAs, one-way flows, and that's fine for a generation-to-grid model. But if you want a grid-to-grid model, I'd certainly recommend cap and floor. So what happens is, on Viking Link, on our other cap and floor interconnectors, we sell capacity, physical transmission rights on those interconnectors. And we've got about 100 customers that buy from us, and we do it through auctions, so it's very competitive. And we sell capacity from 3 years ahead, 2 years ahead, year ahead, 6 months ahead, quarters, months, weeks, day ahead, within day, lots of different products. And we choose, as the interconnector owner, when to sell those products because, prices are very volatile in one country, never mind, the differential between two volatile countries. So timing is everything. Spreads can be very low, spreads can also be very high. And, you obviously should try and sell your capacity when spreads are high. So, of course, all those capacity sales delivers a revenue for the link. And as we agree a regulatory model with our regulator Ofgem, we agree a suitable floor and a suitable cap. And this is a risk-sharing mechanism between the developers, in this case, National Grid and the Danish TSO Energinet, and consumers. So if all those revenues don't meet the floor, I've not used my laser for a while, that one there. So if all those capacity sales don't actually give you, over a 5-year settlement period, revenues that hit the floor, then consumers will contribute through their bills to allow the interconnector owners to take revenue at the floor. And that floor is a place where you don't make any money. It's based on the cost of debt and operational expenditure. However, if your capacity sales get you into this place here, then that's maintained and kept by the interconnector owner, and there's no need for consumers to top up. And this is the good news for consumers. If you're above here with all your capacity sales, then you pay back to consumers. And so there's a great risk-sharing mechanism between the developer and the consumers, that get the benefits from the interconnector in the first place. And if you're wondering, I wonder how all that's worked out, it's worked out very well for consumers and for the interconnector owners. And since 2019, almost 500 million, look, 473 million above cap earnings paid out to UK consumers by the interconnector assets. And that's a direct reduction. People talk about affordability and subsidies. Okay, there's a subsidy mechanism for interconnectors through the cap and floor, but it hasn't been enacted yet. And in fact, we've paid above cap earnings, a significant amount, which has been a direct reduction in consumer bills. So we talk about carbon reduction, we talk about affordability, and I mentioned at the start security of supply. And Viking's a young asset, as we know, December 23, but great pleasure in telling you that Viking Link kept the lights on in the UK back in 8th of January this year. And what happened was it was a very low wind situation in the UK. It was very cold, demand was very high, some conventional plants tripped. And we were short in the UK. We were short of, I think, around 500 megawatts of meeting demand and reserve. And I got a call from the National Energy System Operator, NESO, in the morning. And they called me because Viking Link was down at 700 megawatts rather than 1,400 megawatts. And the reason why we'd taken half of it off was because Energenet, our partner, had asked us to, because they wanted to do some work on their West Coast transmission line. And because we get on well and we're trying to look after each other, we agreed. Now, it turns out there was a supply crunch. So I called our Energenet partners, and I said, we can bring the link back to 1,400 megawatts, but can your system handle it? Let me check. So the chap walked into the control center. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. So I called my operations team and said, we need to get the capacity of Viking Link back to 1,400 megawatts. I then spoke to Energenet and said, how can we make sure the flows happen? Energenet said, well, Germany is not under stress because they've got lots of wind. We can buy 700 megawatts from Germany, and then we can sell it to the UK. Okay, can you do that? Yep. And so off they went, and they bought 700 megawatts at 80 euros per megawatt hour. They sold it to the UK at 140 euros per megawatt hour. And at the same time, NESO, our system operator, was dispatching and balancing timescales gas plants at 5,000. You can imagine the savings for consumers during that. So just to recap then, I've tried to, I suppose, weave in some thoughts, for the ASEAN region based on the UK and our European partners' experience. And the first line there, the one team mindset. You must have it. You must partner up with someone who you trust, and you must share with them and be very open and transparent with them what you really care about. Understand what they care about. Understand the nice to haves, because it's nice to deliver some of those, not necessary. And then also create a list of things that each of you don't actually care about. Because if you assume something, it's likely to be wrong. And you should look after each other and look out for each other as part of one team. Internally within your businesses and your companies, your firms, you know how strong a one-team mindset can be. And that's the way it should be on a cross-border asset. The second major bullet point there is both countries will benefit. And I hear a lot of stories about, that views that one country won't benefit. And of course, it is different because if a country is mainly exporting, then it's got producer benefit. And if one country is importing, it's got mainly consumer benefit. And of course, everybody wants the consumer benefit bit because that's the bit that proves affordability and feeds through to the bills and so on. But each country is benefiting. Now, IFA, it didn't have a fully liquid, liberalized market at each end when it started off. It was two state-owned companies, EDF and the CEGB, the Central Electricity Generating Board in the UK. And 4 years later, 1990, the UK liberalized and put a day-ahead power pool in place. But again, with our partners, we still made it work. EDF, who were co-owners of the link, they were able to submit offers to sell energy into that day-ahead pool, and also were able to buy from it through bids. And in 2001, the UK went to a fully liberalized market, half-hourly market, and France was slowly liberalizing, creating a day-ahead market and so on. And again, we made it work. And now you've got a 15-minute market in France and a 30-minute market in the UK. And the prices are, the capacity is sold. The traders and the utility companies buy that capacity, and then they choose to buy low and sell high in each hour. So you don't need perfection and two fully liberalized markets to build a link. You just need to work out how it's going to be done, and how it might evolve depending on a number of assumptions. And interconnectors shouldn't be restricted either. They should be allowed to flow. And it's quite easy when one country is in a period of stress to say, cut it off, sever it. And I've heard that a lot. But no, you must work with your partners, pick up the phone, ask what, where their hotspots are, tell them where your hotspots are, help each other, through emergency assistance products, through the interconnector, change the flows as two system operators so that you're helping each other out. And it works well on a 50-50 basis when CapEx, OpEx, and revenues are shared, on a simple, fair, and equitable basis. It doesn't work so well if you're being really picky about who should pay for what. The relationship can break down very quickly. And it's like when you go for a meal. Myself and Mark went for a meal this week. Shall we just split the bill, Mark? Yeah, we split the bill. Mark said, yeah, but you had, a whiskey, Rob, and I only had a Diet Coke. Maybe you should pay more. And we didn't do that. We didn't do that. We just split the bill, and we left, hand in hand. Not quite, but you get my point. And you've got to want to do it. I hear a lot, across the ASEAN region about blockers. We don't see blockers. There are blockers, but we just see an opportunity for creative solutions, and solutions that benefit both countries as you create an interconnector. And with that, I'll leave you to the panel session, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for that captivating presentation, Rob. I think it's fair to say that we all love interconnectors a little more now. Thank you for sharing with us the hard-won lessons that set the stage perfectly for our panel session now. To moderate the panel session, I would like to invite Ms. Hyunjung Lee to the stage. Hyunjung Lee is the GMS ASEAN Energy Program lead at ADB, where she advances regional energy cooperation and integration to strengthen energy security and sustainability in Southeast Asia. She leads the strategy development for GMS and ASEAN energy initiatives, provides policy and technical support on cross-border connectivity, renewable energy, and regional power trade. Okay, now on to our panelists. First, I'd like to invite Mr. Nick Wright to the stage. Nick is the Senior Vice President for Business Development at Sarawak Energy. In that capacity, Nick leads Sarawak Energy's commercial key accounts and Sarawak's role in APG through interconnections with Indonesia, Singapore, Sabah, and Brunei, and their international business as well. He is also a director of PT Kayan Hydropower Nusantara, which is developing the largest hydropower project in Indonesia. Before joining Sarawak Energy, Nick was senior advisor to the Minister of Energy and Resources in Tasmania. Nick also holds an MBA from the Graduate School of Business, University of New England. As our next panelist, I'd like to invite Ms. Sarah Wilson to the stage. Sarah is the managing partner of A&O Sherman's Bangkok office and head of its energy, natural resources, and infrastructure practice. Sarah specializes in project development and finance transactions in the power and infrastructure sectors across ASEAN and wider Asia-Pacific region. On to our next panelist now. I'd like to invite Mr. Pirapat Vithes Richardion. Pirapat is a senior energy analyst at the IEA Regional Cooperation Center in Singapore. He leads their efforts to support energy transition in Southeast Asia, focusing on renewable energy integration, cross-border power trade, and power system flexibility. Pirapat holds a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of New South Wales, Australia. And to round up our panel, I'd now like to invite Mr. Phil Napier-Moore. Phil is Matt McDonald's energy sector leader for Asia, responsible for the group's regional support to clients on the global energy transition. He has over 20 years of experience and has supported diverse international stakeholders on low-carbon power, cross-border connectivity, including several hundred plants now successfully operation, and ongoing gigawatt-scale firm projects using energy storage and subsea interconnections. I'll now leave you to the capable hands of Ms. Hyunjung Lee.
Okay, thank you very much, Hyunjung, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor to moderate this session, especially after a fascinating and inspiring presentation from Rob. Give us a lot of confidence, actually, that things can be done. We have to find out our own challenges in the region and work from there. As Hyunjung explained, actually, we have ADB have been supporting various sub-regional and regional initiatives in energy sector in the region. And we have learned actually also in ASEAN, in the Southeast Asian countries, also we have experiences, mainly on the land-based interconnections. And across the borders, there's a source-to-grid project, but also there's a grid-to-grid interconnection project as well. There are also initiatives run by the countries, the multilateral power trade pilot. So there have been also trial and then also the learnings from the region. And I'm so glad actually we have gathered so experienced panelists actually working in the region, work on those cross-border projects in the Greater Mekong region, but also in the other part of the Southeast Asian countries. And then also we basically like to deep dive kind of key questions, the moments. Now we like to interconnect the region through sea-based infrastructure, which is not been done in the large scale. There's also interconnections done some part of the countries. The short distance, more the AC system. But it's a kind of long distance interconnection. The different systems is going to be a new chapter. And it's indeed is going to be a big game changer. From there, we also see a lot of the opportunities that the region is heading to the net zero, and also a lot of renewable also need to be integrated in the system. Therefore, grid-to-grid interconnection indeed is going to be a true APG. From this sense, I would like to actually maybe structure this panel discussion to maybe 5 themes. One is about what is the role of these subsea interconnections to realize the APG vision, but also kind of from there break down the specific challenges from the technical, financial, and bankability perspective, given that we also have a developers, the NIC here. And then also the legal and regulatory regimes, what should be done from that side to make the project bankable. What are the role of the also regional entities for the coordination and policy development, etc. So maybe without further ado, I'd like to start with maybe Pirafat, from your own work as a system modeler in the many years, but also working in the IEA. What do you see in the future in terms of the fully integrated APG by 2045, and then also role of these subsea interconnectors?
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. First of all, thanks very much for the invite to participate. It's a pleasure to be here and to be discussed about the issues of ASEAN Power Grid. It's a great question as well, because we look out 20 years from now. If you ask me what I'm going to be doing in 20 years, I'm also not sure. But this one, I think we need to have a vision in terms of, basically what I has been doing is that try to classify in terms of the stage of the interconnections, like starting from early stage, shallow stage, and then deep stage. We just need to see where we want to be in 25 years. Because regional interconnection is a long and continuous process. I mean, we have seen that all of the regions start off with bilateral exchange and then go further with, MOU agreement between countries, and then establishments of regional entity, or could be some kind of like mechanisms to coordinate. And it really takes time. As you've seen from, what we have to identify is that, I mean, previously, over the past couple of years, we see ASEAN Power Grid, LTMS, as early stage, which is at the beginning, right? But then over the past couple of years, we see a lot of development, a lot of the momentum building behind it. And then the countries that are in the shallow stage, like the one that, for example, Southern Africa, Power Pool, Central America, and then the one at deep stage, just means you have a fully connected system, and then harmonized framework, regulatory, operational practice, and so on. So I think the questions come down to what do we want to achieve in 20 years from now. The first ASEAN Power Grid MOU was signed almost 20 years ago, and we've seen some development, particularly the pilot, the LTMS, and then over the next 20 years, I would say it might be ambitious to go aiming for deep stage, the one that we see in the EU. What I'm thinking is that, and also this is according to the context of Southeast Asia, which is different to Europe. The market structure, only 2 countries would have fully liberalized markets. The mid stage would be the one that I think ASEAN Power Grid can move towards to. Like we have to increase interconnections, but not fully like extensive infrastructure. But at least we have the target to achieve that. Establishments of a regional entity. It doesn't have to be a binding one. It could be a non-binding. And we see the progress of the new enhanced APG MOU, the establishments of APG secretariats, which ACE will take on the role. But I think that the next step is just how we want to do that in terms of what would be the role of this regional entity in terms of harmonizing technical standards, operations. Might have a short-term, some kind of short-term markets, but it's got to be like on a voluntary basis, similar to what South African Power Pool has been doing, and also like Central America. So I think that would be my thought. That's my personal thoughts in terms of the vision over the next 20 years. Yep.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's very good insight. Actually, we have to also start from the small with the neighboring countries, setting up the building blocks, and then toward the full integrated market in the future. It's good that actually there are experienced other regions, and then also we already set the kind of roadmap, and then also the political commitment toward the journey. I'd like to move to actually the kind of specific aspect of this infrastructure development, maybe from the technical challenges, maybe it could be a bit more straightforward compared to the other challenges that maybe we'll discuss a bit later on. So Phil, can I invite you to share your own experiences, how the engineering perspective, actually this type of the challenges in ASEAN context you see, and then also being addressed so far?
Sure, and maybe I'll just build on the strategic vision question a little bit too, because I think there is a work plan for ASEAN. We can build that out in the next 20 years. There's a number of interconnectors that we planned. There'll be the AIMS 3+. There's a lot of harmonization to do, but what else, right? We heard from Rob's presentation, there's been a progressive rollout of additional interconnectors from UK to Europe. Right now we're planning individual interconnectors between certain pairs of member countries. There will be room for more. By 2045, we should be planning for the next interconnectors so that we ultimately can create a meshed grid, that will have more resilience, more transfer capacity, and will facilitate the transfer of different generation technologies than what we envisage now. Right now, there's very clear quick wins from low-cost markets to high-cost markets. For example, from Sarawak to Singapore, Sarawak to Peninsula Malaysia, other places that are rich in hydropower resources. That will change over time. Technology is changing very fast. I love sharing the Terra Solar case study of in the Philippines of firmed solar, competitive with mid-merit coal. The range that those technologies can meet, extending into base load, is just a question of when, not if. And that will change what we can do with these interconnectors. So I think the long-term vision there has got to be two-way flows, and it's got to be, increased numbers of deployments that allow us to create that increased resilience and cost effectiveness. That means that we already should start thinking about some of that now. We're going to build interconnectors that make sense, and we're going to design them for their current application. But we also want to future-proof thinking about the long-term vision that we're discussing here. So maybe moving on to the technical side of things then. So we're involved in a number of the interconnectors in Europe that you'll have seen on the screen already, including some of those that have been project finance, non-recourse project finance, still quite unusual for transmission infrastructure. and so quite a specific range of conditions that need to be met for that to be possible. The offshore wind sector provides a great set of examples for what's possible there, if it's generator to grid. And so we've got those projects in Europe, we've got those projects up in Northeast Asia, in Japan, Taiwan, Korea. A lot of good precedents on what can be banked there. So all these technical risks are ultimately manageable. You know, in terms of subsea interconnection, there's good precedents of how they're managed. There's good precedents of how they can be managed to the extent that they can be banked. But they haven't always been managed well. And you know, the fact that insurance premiums rose very significantly for subsea cable infrastructure around the time of the offshore wind boom in the North Sea speaks to those risks, right? You have this stat that 10% of 10 to 20% of the capital cost of an offshore wind farm might be the subsea cables, but 80% of the insurance claim volume is because of the subsea cables. So it can be done right, but it hasn't always been done right. There is now a good set of international alignments, the Carbon Trust Guidelines on cable barrier risk assessment, for example, that we can follow. That in itself implies a certain level of detail on how we look at geotechnical risks, how we look at the risks of anchor strike from passing vessels. You need good data. Ultimately, you need good data. You need to process it in a way that it can inform good decisions, right? So technical risks, ultimately, will our cable be installed right? Will it continue to operate? How do we repair it if it doesn't operate right? And I think most of that comes down to following good engineering practice, using competent counterparties, managing the risks appropriately in the contracts, and putting in place maintenance arrangements and overall operation procedures that minimize the risk of damage during operation, which might include pooled vessels, pooled standby vessels, and will increasingly include kind of cybersecurity requirements too. So, and we can go into that in more detail if that'd be interesting.
Okay, thank you very much. I think maybe message is, I guess, yes, there are challenges, but there's a good engineering practices principles applied. And then maybe it's now time to invite Nick. Actually, Nick's the one really has to put together everything and then to understand the technical challenges and then also to think about the bankability because it costs a lot of also money to study and prepare this type of the infrastructure to begin with, and then to go through the FDI financial closure at the end. So maybe if you can share what kind of challenges you think is kind of most significant and how we should tackle these challenges from the different stakeholders.
Thank you. And before I comment, before I answer, I do a quick audience health check. The health of the audience is a function of the number of people asleep, the number of people on their phone, and the number of people leaving. And on all three counts, I'm in trouble. So I try and say something entertaining. It's the end of a long day. For those of you who've heard this before, I apologise, but I think the fundamental challenge here is that we've well passed the point of diminishing returns in advocacy among those who already believe and understand. The challenge is not to sort of intensify the belief of those who are already convinced. It was a wonderful presentation from Rob, but none of the people who need to see that are here. Because it's not intuitive to many of the actors in ASEAN to share their precious renewable energy resources, and it's not intuitive to make yourself dependent upon a neighbour who might, over time, suddenly become unreliable. And this links then to the challenge of bankability, and I use the Borneo to mainland Southeast Asia project. That's the name I use to avoid being too specific about where the project will land and who's doing what. So we call it Borneo to mainland Southeast Asia. And that necessarily involves a transit country for whom it's not possible to collect electricity as part of the arrangement, who will inevitably ask, well, what's in this for me? And I think people don't quickly turn to the answer to that. And then in terms of bankability, let's make a rough guess that this project cost in the vicinity of 7 or 8 billion Singapore dollars multiplied by 0.7. Let's say we borrow 5 billion Singapore dollars. Who is going to lend 5 billion Singapore dollars on the strength of a garbage bag full of permits from 20 different regulators that all expire at a different time. That's just unrealistic. Nobody is going to lend on that basis. And so the alternative to that is to mobilise international public law in a way that's been done for other similar agendas, and the one that I'm familiar with by way of preparation for our project is the Malaysia-Thailand gas agreement that says to the world and to lenders that the parties to the project are committed to policy stability and regulatory certainty for the life, if not for the entire project, at least for the tenor of the loan. So I see this as being foundational. It's a very difficult job for a Minister of Energy to go and convince their Minister of Foreign Affairs and their Minister for the Economy and Minister for Finance and the Attorney General's chambers to do such a radical thing, to kick off the Byzantine task of negotiating an international agreement, because the foundation of trust and mutual understanding of why this is good is not yet established. So I guess that's my frustration, that we're too deep on things that are secondary and not enough attention on the foundations for these things to move. I would love to show that presentation and using the Netherlands as an example from that map. Viking Link, no electrons to the Netherlands, but they still agree because it's part of a broader scheme of mutual benefit. And that trust in broader mutual benefit, I would respectfully submit, in ASEAN power circles does not yet exist.
Okay, thank you. We already touched very fundamental kind of enablers that for any interconnector project to come. And I think this is something that also ASEAN as a whole also try to address, and trust, as well as those all kind of the procedures and streamline to enable the business and then in the investment to come. And I think this is a nice segue actually to turn to Sarah to really look into this aspect, actually from also the support for the project preparation, and but at the end actually make it bankable. So what kind of the regulatory legal regimes do you think is most viable for this type of the project actually in the region, based on what we have experienced in kind of so far in the land-based interconnections, and they have a kind of many projects that are being banked and then also implemented?
Thanks very much. Is that working? Is this one working? Yeah, okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, pleasure to be here as well, and thanks very much for the introduction. So I think talking about sort of what has worked and focusing on lessons learned is incredibly important, and I wanted to do that from two perspectives today. One, to sort of draw shamelessly on Rob's presentation about the Viking Link, and sort of what has worked, what has been used, what are the lessons learned from the global example, but then also focusing, because we are in ASEAN, in terms of what has worked in ASEAN with relevant example projects here, and actually hopefully by the end of sort of the what will be a short description, demonstrating to people that similar conditions have been needed in terms of the setup of those projects to make them work, particularly in the context of government support, by which I don't always mean funding, but I mean supporting the projects in a positive way to ensure that those are able to achieve financial close. So the relevant projects I want to discuss, as has been sort of alluded to already, is the land-based interconnectors in ASEAN. There actually have been many of those projects already developed on a cross-border basis here. That's not to say that we don't, and I think we'll hear a bit more from Phil as well about the specific challenges and the differences in terms of building subsea interconnectors. Those are significantly more challenging for various reasons. But in terms of the framework for ensuring that these projects proceed, particularly from a government perspective, I still think that the land interconnectors provide some very valuable lessons. I'm going to give examples of two types of projects that have been done on a private basis. We know that there are government-to-government, grid-to-grid interconnectors, but these are projects that have been project financed on a non-recourse or limited recourse basis within ASEAN. One example is projects that have involved both generation and transmission. And the key example of those is the development of projects in Laos that supply power either cross-border to Thailand or Vietnam. And in fact, we've now reached the stage with those projects, and as people have mentioned, it's sort of a steady build, where a number of those projects, there's multiple generation projects all connecting through one interconnector to supply power to IGAT in Thailand. So that is already a development from what was originally put in place, which was generation and transmission through one transmission line. The second example is the standalone interconnector projects, independent transmission projects, as they're sort of known internationally. And an example of that is in Cambodia, CPTL, the Cambodia Power Transmission Line project, which was built, a transmission network in the northwest of Cambodia. And basically what that allows EDC, the Cambodian government, to do is take supply of power from grid in Thailand and to supply into 3 provinces in Cambodia, including, for those for which it's helpful to have a reference, Siem Reap, which is where Angkor Wat is, and so a tourist hotspot that needs sort of a decent supply of electricity to keep that, that industry going within Cambodia. Okay, so having set the sort of stage a little bit in terms of those projects, what has actually allowed those projects to proceed? Well, first of all, a guaranteed revenue stream. Now, in those projects, it's been in the form of PPAs and concession agreements, but we've heard from Rob in terms of the Viking Link about having the cap and floor regime. So that is number one in terms of what's needed to get these projects developed and financed. Okay, number two, clear government-to-government support and policy support behind that. What we've seen in the Laos to Thailand projects is there has always been a Thai-Lao MOU over time and at regular intervals that is updated and extended to always cover the future capacity that is intended to come online within Laos and supply to Thailand. So it's clear that both governments are standing behind that. And in fact, on these specific projects that are developed, there is actually a government of Laos to IGAT specific agreement that agrees what happens if certain circumstances arise with respect to those projects. So there's not just the MOU, but specific intergovernmental agreements for each project. Third condition, it's very clear what the benefit is to each government, and Rob talked about that in the context of the Viking Link, and it's been mentioned as well, this sort of seeing this not holistically, rather than sort of the individual consumer or supplier benefits. In Thailand, it's obviously receiving this renewable electricity at a low cost. In Laos, it is about the investment in the country, the development that takes place in the project area. There are also royalties and taxes paid to the government, and actually all of those, including the Cambodian project I mentioned, are BOT projects, so ultimately there is also a transfer of infrastructure to the government. I'm not saying that has to be the case, but just by way of examples of the benefits. There are others as well. The final thing which I wanted to talk about, and going to the point about sort of the regulatory environment, and this is a very specific example, and it's showcased by the Viking Link as well. So the general point is putting in place regulation and allowing structures to be developed that allow the project to actually be developed and, if necessary, project financed. The example I would give of this is when we do the Lao to Thai projects, it is very easy because, and all of the projects I've described, it's not very easy, but just bear with me. In the context of the structuring, it is possible to put in place one project company and to construct everything in Laos. IGAT then takes the risk for everything on the Thai side of the border and takes the supply of the power. It takes the risk for the permitting, licensing on the Thai side. If we have a Subsea project, that is obviously not possible. There are going to be at least 2 jurisdictions involved. And what that usually means is that you need to have a project company in each jurisdiction because of the relevant permits and licensing that you need to achieve in each of those jurisdictions. However, you cannot slice a cable, and I'm not the technical expert here, but you can't think of the cable and slice it down the middle at the border. It needs to be thought of as one asset. So both of those project companies set up in both those jurisdictions and need to be allowed to have the same shareholding ideally and the same financing so they can be developed by one developer, one contractor, one operator. If we don't have that in place, it is going to make it much more difficult to develop these projects. And as I confirmed helpfully with Rob before, giving this presentation and making that statement, I understand that the Viking Link was developed as a proper 50-50 JV where the ownership of the cable, and the development, the construction, the operation was on a JV basis. So that was not split between different shareholders based on the jurisdiction that the cable was running through. And sorry, I've taken up a reasonable amount of time, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it's a very good point actually you made. So draw on the backing examples, but really kind of also from our own experiences, there are some commonalities that we should apply even for the sea-based infrastructure development. Basically, one of the actually distinctive kind of differences between the land-based and then also sea-based infrastructure at the moment is kind of takes a lot of time to prepare, and then there's a lot of also supply chain constraint, delivery constraint, also alignment is needed. Also Rob also mentioned about the long actually project preparation time as well. So it's really important to also think ahead and the kind of what are the kind of needs from the region and how we can assure the kind of the cables and vessels and the materials came on board the time that we need. So on that particular topics, also like to invite some of you to share also some perspective. So maybe Phil, would you like to maybe share some views? What are the current constraints and how you think actually is going to be, how much is going to be serious actually for the region to bring this infrastructure in time?
So I think for those of you who aren't aware in the audience, I mean, the supply chain for subsea cables and HVDC converters is severely constrained. And that's represented through long lead times, high prices, and constrained demand. So it wouldn't be atypical to have to place a cable deposit maybe 3 years before financial close. And then we heard example of 4 years of cable manufacturing for Viking Link, and then installation. So you could easily be talking kind of placing a very significant deposit 8 years before commercial operation, depending on the project, depending on the cable length for one of these large-scale schemes. HVDC converters, even more constrained supply chain, fewer international suppliers. Now, the dynamics of this market are always changing. If projects come off the boil, capacity may come onto the market. But right now, I think we do have to plan for these projects being very long-term and needing these very high upfront capital requirements for the cable deposit. It's not just about the cable as well, it's about the cable-laying vessel. Some of the largest cable-laying vessels currently operating can do 17 kilotons, so they can possibly do 100 kilometers of HVDC cable in one run. There's bigger vessels coming onto market. Right now, there's maybe only 10 vessels in the world that would do this kind of project. More are coming. As more come online with higher capacities, that could bring down costs, so that could be beneficial. But when we're planning these projects, we're planning it a long way out, and we have to plan it with a very strong awareness of the supply chain constraints. There's no point doing a feasibility study without looking at the scenarios for the supply chain over that time frame. And maybe another point to mention is, not every seabed condition is different. In Korea, we have 10-meter sand waves, and we need a sort of effectively a 10-meter vertical injector to get the cable right down 10 meters below the sand, so that as the soils shift due to currents, the cable is not exposed. In Singapore, we have exposed rock coming into some of the shores, so we need kind of rock saws and cutters. So we need the right cable vessel with the right burial tool from the right supplier. So all of those supply chain constraints start to come into play and need to be planned for. Generally, the projects coming from Riau Islands to Singapore, shorter cables, AC, much shorter time frames, but equally, the offshore wind business competes for exactly the same segment, and so those, you may still have long time frames on those as well.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, apparently there are kind of quite stress and constraint in the supply chain at the global level, and so there seem to be a kind of ways to also then address those challenges. And I wonder, any of panelists would like to address this question?
Just perhaps to state the obvious, that all of the manufacturing capacity is a very long way away, and one possible mitigant for that would be to have manufacturing in ASEAN.
And maybe just to build on that, that would rely on aggregating demand across several of these projects, right? You're not going to get a factory without minimum 5,000 kilometers of cable demand, which is several connectors, yeah.
And just on the sort of thinking to the impact of those type of schedules, 3 years in advance, etc., and the need to put down this deposit. No company is going to invest that capital and put down that deposit until they're certain that they're going to be able to move forward with the project and achieve FID. And in order to do that, they need to know, what do they need to put in place from a permitting perspective, that permitting works, that they need to have been able to assess the regulatory environment and be convinced by the government support behind what's going to happen and know that they have a viable project. So all of that needs to happen before a company can get to FID, can decide to put down that deposit, can then move forward to convince its lenders that it can achieve financial close. So just thinking of the knock-on effects of those supply chain issues, including the convincing lenders that they should be financing these projects. They're going to be looking at the potential risk of delays from the supply chain issues. So the sort of that upfront development and structuring and making sure that works from the government perspective is key.
Okay, I think we kind of come to common understanding what is need to be done at the moment in terms of the kind of assuring the demand certainty to actually investors and then also financiers to commit certain amount of the capital front, or even actually think about the manufacturing facilities in the region. All of these actually require the level of the certainties assured it comes, in the future, there will be the demand. So I think this is really good kind of insight, and also something that is make it as a more actionable in the future. Also that actually give us a bit of, next questions then. What are the key kind of actions need to be taken from the ASEAN level, from like a regional basis or the country basis? What are the policy coordinations? What kind of cooperation is needed? Maybe I will invite Pirapant is for the remarks, and also we open up the maybe floor to collect a few questions if, since we have maybe around 5 minutes more. So please raise your hands if you have any questions. But in the meantime, I'd like to invite Pirapant.
I'll just be quick. We recently published a booklet for best practices in regional interconnection just to support the G20 South African presidency. So we identify your dimensions that related to your questions in terms of what are the actions, at the national and also regional levels. Like the first one, of course, we heard about it. It's about like political will and also commitment, at the national levels. And then the second one is in terms of what are the institutional frameworks, what role of institutions have to have in this, what responsibility that do we have. And then we write down looking at in terms of the technical harmonizations. Of course, this is quite important as well. That's, related to both, not just that covering subsea as well as the overhead lines. And then, as I mentioned as well, having some kind of like cross-border electricity market trade, on a voluntary basis in the context of Southeast Asia. And then, of course, the last one that we also talk about is about coordinated planning and investment. So that between, of course, the governments of different countries. But I think that the step is about, of course, as you see, is that the political momentum we've seen over the past couple of years, especially today with the announcements of enhanced APG MOU and with the ambitions of the regions. But I think we need to have momentums and the regional bodies to identify what roles it should play in terms of who will do the planning, who will set out in terms of operational technical standards and all this. It's still some of the dimensions that still need to be addressed, I think, in the context of Southeast Asia. I'll just leave it at that now.
I think also those elements actually also kind of reflected ASEAN's enhanced MOU as a way to go, and of course details has to be mapped out. And then also we understand there will be a subsea cable also framework, kind of regional framework development going forward. So some of the key elements that actually you mentioned, and then other panelists, I believe this is something useful to reflect. May I maybe check the floors if you have any questions, either to panelists or to our presenter? Yes. Scott, please.
Phil, you mentioned that the energy systems will change as technology evolves. What does that mean in terms of procuring and thinking about the supply chain? What sort of design considerations might mean that the way in which you procure either converters or cables might look different? And what are the knock-on effects for the supply chain on that?
So one simple example would be the RFP1 for imports to Singapore originally envisaged 75% loading on those cables, and that might go up or down depending on the technology. But is that how the cable will be loaded in the future? Because if it's not, you might need to size the cable differently. And if it's a different cable size, you may ultimately need a different installation vessel too. The converters, maybe in the future you want them to provide ancillary services, black start capabilities, ability to support cross-border with maintaining overall stability of the system with more and more intermittent renewables coming into the grid. So there's potentially, you may not design the facilities necessarily for two-way flows. So if you want to maintain that, it has to be part of the considerations at the beginning. You may not design it for expandability, right? You might need to retain additional bays, additional landing points, if you want to have the option of building further parallel connectors, and particularly in places like Singapore where the number of landing points could be constrained, and grid connection points. So some of the thinking there. None of that should stop you just building a project that makes sense, but it might mean you think about exactly how you build it or specify it slightly differently. Yeah.
If there's no further questions, maybe I'd like to wrap up this panel discussion. I'd like to thank the panelists for your contributions, and maybe I'll return the floor to Umang. Okay, so Umang basically suggesting we can actually wrap the session as well. So thank you very much. One thing I'd like to really emphasize is now this subsea cable infrastructure interconnector is not optional. It's kind of must to have for APG to be realized. So I hope we can continue to work together, and based on all the suggestions inside, actually we also like to reflect into our dialogues with the government and then also ASEAN to enable this investment in the region. Thank you very much for your participation.